Hi, I'm Krayzar, and this is a video on the SNES APU. The genesis of this video is basically a thread on Blue Sky. I believe it's Dwango AC, posting under the TASBot name, solicited some help from the TAS and speedrunning community, I'm assuming, and people in general, to kind of test out a specific ROM on real hardware. The idea behind that is measuring the sample rate of the APU, and the test was kind of twofold, two main points. One, the SNES consoles seem to be getting faster with age, and one of the reasons for that seems to be a less precise part used in the audio circuitry, probably a cost-cutting measure. And the second part is that they wanted to see if the consoles got out of sync with what was supposed to be the spec as they heated up. So the higher temperature, would that affect the sample rate? That second part didn't seem to pan out. My own consoles do not seem to, exhibit a noticeable difference. But yeah, it doesn't seem like that's a thing. But that kind of got me thinking. We have all of these modern emulators, and I kind of wondered what values some of these emulators use. And obviously there's only a few that have re-recording and task capabilities, but I kind of wanted to see personally what consoles I have that mirror closely to emulators. The real impetus behind this is that I'm having a lot of trouble using a TASBot tool to try and sync my Ogre Battle Fire Seal tasks with real hardware. So I kind of wanted to see if we can, kind of determine what would work best for it. What I ended up doing is I tested all three of my real hardware consoles, and I also tested the Mister, I tested the Analog Pocket, and I tested the Analog Super NT, along with a bunch of emulators, a lot of higher accuracy and low accuracy. I'm looking at ZNES. So hopefully this will kind of provide some statistics on what the default value is for a wide swath of emulators and FPGA consoles, and folks can maybe use it to match their console to an emulator that would work a little better for them. I don't know, there's not a whole lot of options out there for re-recording and TAS emulators, so it is probably of limited usefulness, but we can hope. And maybe this can allow us to have some toggleable settings eventually inside emulators for the sample rate. But yeah, we'll see. Let's get on to it.
Before we start, I just wanted to mention this specific thread was where I got the ROM and the tools to do this. I'll try to put a direct link to the actual ROM down in the bottom of the video. But yeah.
So the actual test ROM that we're using is from, I believe his name is Lidnariq. Yeah, Lidnariq, let's say. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. But basically, as you can see here, most of the emulators are testing at 32,039 hertz for the DSP sample rate. There's a few that are testing at, sort of like a in between 39.5. There's basically the FOST or Mednefen BizHawk core that seems to be testing at around 44, 43. There's no cache SNES that is testing at 152. And we have Kindred, which seems to test a little bit below everything at basically 32,000. So those are kind of the mainstream ones. The one that I am kind of baffled at is SNES, of course, which reads a DSP sample rate of 56,000, off by 24,000. I don't know what to say to that other than it's SNES. And here we are at the actual tests for the real hardware that I have. The top left is the launch edition SNES that was made within the first 2 years of the SNES being on the market. We have the SNES One Chip 02 that I own, and we have the SNES Junior that I own at the very bottom. On the bottom right, we have the Mr. SNES core. So basically, there's not too much difference in all of these. They seem to be getting faster as the SNES went on, and the most significant difference is in the SNES Junior. But again, that's not a huge outlier compared to, what we kind of expected. Honestly, it kind of makes me wonder if the parts in the later revisions of the SNES are just the thing that's kind of throwing everything off. But obviously, we would need a lot more data to be able to determine that. It is interesting to note that there's not a huge amount of change when we bump things up. I left these on for 6 hours, and I think the biggest difference that we're going to see is with the launch edition console. I think it jumps up by about maybe 12 to 14 hertz. That's pretty much it. The SNES One Chip 02 and the SNES Junior are actually less than a 10 hertz difference compared to the launch edition console. So there does seem to be a little bit more variation in the launch edition. And as you can see, the One Chip 02 is barely 3 to 4 hertz difference. It's a little bit interesting that it seems like the SNES Junior is actually more stable than either of the other consoles. You'll rarely see its numbers move around. And you'll see that the Mr. SNES core is pretty much locked in at that 32,000 hertz value that the SNES technical manuals seem to all indicate it should be running at. Here's the Pocket and the Super NT, and the Pocket basically uses the same core as the Mr. SNES, so no surprises there. They're really only 1 hertz off. So here we have the results, and it's not terribly surprising. The one main aberration that I can see here is Faust. That core is supposed to be based off of Mednefen, but it has a different sample rate than Mednefen. It makes me wonder what exactly is changed about it. The other aberrations, of course, is SNES, like we mentioned. No cache seems to use values most likely read directly from a one chip or later console. Now for the minor differences, the only one that really stands out is the fact that iSNES, which used to be a BSNES fork, and Mednafen seem to use a slightly different timing. If I had to guess, it's probably closer to 39.5, or maybe there's some sort of a rounding error in the software emulation that's causing that. But yeah, most things seem to go off of that 32,039, which I am assuming are all derived from BSNES. Kind of a testament to Nir's work there. I know for a fact that the older versions of SNES 9X do not test quite so similarly. So it's rather interesting to see. Now, as for the FPGA emulation, this makes sense as well because basically the Analog Pocket SNES core is basically a clone, just re-engineered of the MR core. Super NT, it literally uses what the SNES technical manuals say this should be, or around there basically. So let's just go over what little of a sample size for original hardware that we have here. These are 3 different consoles, and each from sort of a different generation, you could say. I don't think we have any representation on sort of the middle years of the SNES, but we have a launch edition console, one chip 02, and we have a SNES Junior, which is basically the final revision. Something important to note about the SNES one chip 02 is that it still contains the S-Video circuitry. The SNES 3 chip, or the launch edition console, has the biggest difference of all of these at 13. The SNES chip 02 is 5, and the SNES Junior is 5. The actual values of the SNES Junior are quite a bit higher, almost by 100 than either of the other 2 consoles, which is interesting. I probably am going to open each of these up and see what parts are actually used here and try to get a picture of each at this point, because now I'm a little curious. I guess there's not much else to say here except for, like we said, the hot values were taken after 6 hours. So I took them apart. We have the 3 chip, the original model that I have growing up. We have the 1 chip 02, and then we have the SNES Junior. And as you can see, the ceramic resonators in these are very different looking, especially the initial one from my original Super NES. These are almost assuredly MuRata parts here, just by the look, shape, and pretty much everyone else online saying that's what they used. But you can see the 3 chip one looks very different than the other 2. And you can see a little bit of a date code, I'm assuming. And actually, I did find some evidence that kind of leads me to believe that's exactly what it is. You can see almost what looks like an A, maybe a W and a U on these 3. And that little marking in general specifies the year and the month for MuRata. You can see an example of the marking code below here. So we have all this info, we have what the frequency should be written right there, but what were the tolerances for the original MuRata parts here? That's a little bit more difficult to find. The actual sheets don't appear to be online, or at least contain parts from 92 and earlier.
So we're going to have to kind of find something comparable. And I think this, the MuRata CSALS24, I'm not going to read the rest of it off, but basically that's the part that would kind of replace the resonator that's within the SNES APU. And that's the modern equivalent, as far as I can tell, on their current site. It's the closest resonator that they have. Now, I did find some legacy documentation on archive.org from the MuRata website in 1998, and it does appear to have a resonator that almost matches the general descriptions and characteristics of the SNES resonator. It might be a generation or two newer, might not be precisely what that resonator is, but it has a pretty good chance of being what the actual specs were. So we're going to take a look at that as well, because it probably is our best guess at what the tolerances built into the original SNES APU resonators were. Just one more thing before we go. This chart below has a few different measures of tolerances in percentage points. We have the initial tolerance, the temp stability, and aging. My understanding of each of these is that the initial tolerance is how far of a variation that the part can have inherently. The temp stability is how far out of spec the part could get at both ends of the temperature range. And you can see the temperature range right next to that. My understanding of aging is that that is what the part will possibly become after 10 years. But the one thing to note about the aging, and this appears to be correct even for these older parts, it usually is on a time scale that's fixed. So the part will age after 10 years, and after that, it's mostly assumed that the part will not have any more aging effects after that. It's kind of done aging after that 10-year mark. How true that is in practice, I have no idea, but that's at least my understanding. Okay, so here's the math section of this. We basically have 0.5% and then we have 0.2 if we take a look at the modern part. And then we have 0.5 general variance again, and 0.3 for the MuRata old part. And we're using the CSA MX-Z040 for this measurement because the A is probably not the part that they picked. Some sources seem to indicate that one's a little bit more expensive, and it also has a higher temperature tolerance. So most likely Nintendo wouldn't have picked that. It's going to be in a room temperature environment, obviously, so there's no need to do something like that, basically. So we have 288 hertz and 352 hertz, which is kind of unsurprising. It was always going to be quite a bit of a difference here. The one thing that's kind of interesting to note is that all of my SNESs seem to be up in terms of variance, and only up. This plus or minus can mean that it's plus or minus 288 hertz in total, as well as 352 hertz. It only seems to be one direction, and I get from looking online that generally speaking for these ceramic resonators, it really is only one direction. For some reason, the consensus seems to be that they're only ever faster. I don't know why that would be. I tried looking into maybe the technical reasons as to why that would be, and I must be missing something here because I don't really see why, but yeah, it looks like they're faster. Now, I haven't looked at the TASBot results because I didn't really want anything coloring my own impressions of my little case study that I'm doing here. So I think it's time to do that and just see where my consoles line up, and see some more data. Unfortunately, I don't think the TASBot stuff has the console generation that these are from, or even the what's that called? The serial number. So unfortunately, we can't really have a demarcation for where these are in the console generation. My working theory is that perhaps the parts used, as we saw, are actually a little bit different in terms of variance. But obviously that wouldn't be based on the specs, because the specs appear, even on the old one, don't appear too far off from the modern. So yeah. Well, anyways, let's take a look at the TASBot community results. So they seem to have gotten something very similar. There's a few outliers with points down by 31.95, but most of what they have is, top range, the same as mine, 130 to 150. I think the highest range is 182. So at least according to our guesswork, this should be within the tolerance for the part. Okay, so what does this all mean? I think for most folks that aren't doing TASs or anything, not much. Even for speedrunners, this shouldn't really matter at all. But we do know that the ceramic part seems to be within spec from all the data, no matter how we measure it. If we want to use the old part, which seems to be what might have been used in the SNES, still looks to be within spec at 352 hertz. And if we wanted to go by the new part at 288 hertz, it's still basically in spec. So very likely, that's not really a thing that we can rely on being out of spec or being an aberration with the SNES. The one thing that is a little interesting is, why is it only trending up? And obviously, like we said, it appears like that's a known thing about ceramic resonators. But yeah, it's still a little odd. I'd love to know why specifically, whether it's just a manufacturing detail or something in the process, just a general, issue with that type of part, just something. I don't think there's many more questions to think about other than, if there is any sort of trend, is it trending by the revision of console? I do wonder if there's something within the board that basically affects things more. Perhaps maybe it's getting more power at a different stage, something like that. That would basically mean that it's maybe a little bit overdriven somehow. I'm actually not even sure if that's a possibility. But yeah, is there something to do with the board revisions? And very likely it could just be that it's just the batches of resonators were inherently different. There is such a large range in those resonators when you total up all of the aspects that it is totally possible for that to be the normal mid-range. So we maybe got lucky early on in the lifespan of the SNES, and just later on they just trended higher. So takeaways. If you're a speedrunner and you're having a lot of trouble with a trick and you have multiple SNES consoles, try switching to the other one that you have, or the other two that you have. Maybe you'll hit it more often, because quite literally it does look like the sound module does affect in-game lag frames, as they're known in an emulator. Basically, any sort of pause in loading up sound could affect the CPU timing very, very slightly. So that might lower or increase your chances of hitting something that's frame perfect, essentially. But probably not very often. We're talking very, very small frames here and there. It certainly does affect Ogre Battle greatly. In fact, emulation in BizHawk is, by my estimation, on average about 3 frames off from the start of the game. And it just kind of increasingly gets out of spec from there, to say the least. Yeah, I personally don't feel like it's getting faster over time. That's just my opinion, and that is the opinion of someone who has no electrical engineering knowledge, really, and really only has some experience with automation systems. So, yeah, take that with a grain of salt. I think I did my research fairly well here and tried to gather as much information in my tiny case study. Obviously, the sample of my 3 consoles and the 143 or so in the TASBot study is not much. There would have to be probably thousands for us to really make a real dent. And I think there was close to 20 million SNES consoles. I'll actually look that number up, and I'll put it in the video, that were made. So honestly, we'd need close to 10 to 50,000 to really have an accurate picture of what might be going on. So I don't know. We're never going to achieve that with this, but in the meantime, it might help to have emulation that is closer to what actual hardware appears to be. It seems like there's a wide variation, and trying to set that with
an emulator might actually provide a benefit for TASing. Whether that's worth it or not, or if it's even easy for emulator developers, I can't really say. Well, it was a blast kind of going through a lot of the BU forums and even the MuRata site, and kind of trying to go back in time and researching what parts could be used here. I'm going to have some videos of me taking apart each of the SNESs that I own in the links below, and there's going to be pretty much everything linked up, everything that I used during the course of this video on screen. I'll have some sources there. So hopefully this video was a little bit interesting. Obviously there's not much of a story here, but you know, if you found it interesting, feel free to let me know. I don't care if you like this or not. I don't care if you subscribe. Do whatever. You do you. But yeah, I'm trying to get a little bit better about editing in general, and this is sort of practice for me, trying to see what works and what does not. So hopefully it's a little bit better than the stuff that I usually do, and maybe there will be a little bit more of this in the future. I certainly enjoy looking very deeply into very, very tiny subjects, like a case study on an old console APU that I happen to have an interest in. So if you like this, good for you. We're the same kind of weird. Well, have a good one. Krayzar!